You've found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. Diana, are you serious? Stacy fixed her gaze on her friend across the cafe table. I think we have a reason to raise a glass, Diana smiled slyly, bringing the vessel of amber, noble liquid to her lips. The previous evening, she had invited Stacy for lunch. Her friend, known for her passion for other people's secrets and stories, responded instantly. And indeed, there was a reason for the meeting. Diana smoothly adjusted a wave of black hair, showing off new earrings sparkling in her ears. "Oh, I think I can predict the topic of our conversation," Stacy drawled knowingly. "A new admirer, and quite a wealthy one, it seems." "Your perceptiveness knows no bounds," Diana replied. The approaching waiter silently placed the ordered dishes before the women and smiled slightly. "Well, tell me quickly. I'm dying of impatience," Stacy pleaded, as soon as the waiter's silhouette faded into the distance. Diana laughed briefly. It was her favorite pastime, keeping her friend in suspense, doling out information in stingy portions. For Stacy, that tireless chatterbox, such torture was true agony. "He owns a chain of restaurants. He's rich, handsome, generous, charming, and drives the latest model Lexus," Diana blurted out. Stacy feigned a swoon, slumping dramatically in her chair. Then she snapped back to attention, giving her friend an admiring look. "Wow, what a catch! And how long have been together?" She eagerly prepared to soak up every word. "About a week. And we met, you won't believe it, in a flower shop." Diana took a sip from her glass. "I went in there to choose flowers for decorating a hall for a future project and came out with a bouquet of white roses for myself." "Absolutely amazing!" Stacy couldn't stop gushing. "At least show me a picture of this oligarch." Diana reached into her handbag for her phone. A few taps on the screen, and soon the friends were leaning over a photo of a man. "The suit fits perfectly," Stacy declared authoritatively. "You can tell it's not from Aunt Eleanor at the local hair salon. Well built. Honestly, he's not a man. He's a dream." Stacy sighed enviously, propping her cheek on her hand. She hadn't had anyone herself for 6 months, and her last suitor didn't even come close to possessing such a set of virtues. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, as if recalling something long forgotten. Stacy straightened up and, tilting her head shrewdly, looked at Diana. "But we both know there's always a flaw, at least one, right?" The women had long since learned. No matter how perfect a man seemed at first glance, he was bound to have a flaw. It was an unwritten law of the universe. The handsome biker turned out to be a womanizer, the successful businessman a heavy drinker, the charismatic boss a boor and a miser. The rule worked flawlessly. "There is a flaw," Diana admitted with a sigh. "He's married." "Oh, pfft," Stacy waved her hand dismissively. "That's a mere trifle." The friends giggled quietly, and the light clinking of glasses echoed through the cafe. "Women never got in our way," Diana nodded in agreement. "Especially that wife of his. Ugh." The woman made a theatrical grimace, showing complete disdain for the as-yet unknown rival. "No manicure, no hairstyle. She sits at home. She's gotten fat. In short, some kind of frump." "Even so," the gossipy friend exclaimed in surprise. "Let's examine her in more detail." Diana slid a finger with bright red nail polish across the smartphone screen, and soon a photo of a woman clearly over 40, with a simple haircut, in an ordinary business suit and blouse, appeared before the two women. "Is she a teacher or an accountant?" Stacy giggled. "Seriously, such a handsome man is married to this misunderstanding? Are you sure?" "Absolutely, and it's for the best." Diana blew a strand of hair out of her eyes. "Look at me and her, at her and me. Any fool can see who a normal man would rather be with." Stacy scrutinized her friend with a critical eye. "Taking a husband from someone like that isn't even interesting," Diana yawned. "She also seems to be about 7 years older than him. He probably married her as a gray mouse for appearances, and she's happy to sit at home and forgive him everything. I know women like that perfectly well. Ready to wait, as long as he comes home to sleep, right? Stacy said, finishing her wine. But you're going to arrange things so he doesn't even come home to sleep in the end? How will the poor gray mouse survive that? The gossips burst into laughter together. His fingers felt the cool leather of the steering wheel pleasantly. A subtle, expensive scent hung in the car. And even though the car belonged to his wife according to the documents, the registration, and the insurance, the ladies he spent time with didn't need to know that. They wouldn't rummage through his glove compartment looking for proof, would they? It was enough for them that George was driving a luxurious foreign car. His phone came to life, ringing. George glanced at the screen. Nina was calling. He pressed a button on the steering wheel, and his wife's voice came through the speakers. George, today is our chef Eleanor Peterson's 50th birthday at the restaurant on Kromskaya. Please buy a bouquet and congratulate her on our behalf, Nina said quickly and clearly. All right, he replied curtly and ended the call. George didn't love his wife. Rather, he was embarrassed by her and avoided appearing with her in public, except for strictly family gatherings. He treated Nina like an old, reliable, but completely unattractive friend. Nina was older, preferred calm-colored, comfortable clothes made of natural fabrics, used almost no makeup, and never dyed her hair. However, she possessed a sharp mind, and by the age of 30 had managed to become a successful businesswoman. They met when 20-year-old George, who had just arrived from the provinces, came to apply for an administrator position at her newly opened restaurant. It was then that he realized that by attaching himself to Nina, he could make a good life for himself. And he brilliantly executed this plan, becoming first the executive director of her restaurant chain, and then the owner's husband. But after a few years, nature began to take its course. George was lucky. Nature had generously endowed him with the best a man could have in appearance: broad shoulders, a strong chin, tall stature, a dazzling smile. Next to his gray, unremarkable wife, he began to wither. Then he decided he shouldn't deny himself the pleasure of spending time with young, long-legged, appealing beauties. His whims changed from time to time, and George never took any of his paramours seriously. He carefully concealed his affairs from his wife and successfully exploited her work, money, and position. And George didn't care at all what anyone thought about it. The main thing was that Nina remained in the dark. 7 years passed like this. A flower shop appeared up the street. Deciding not to put off the errand, George turned on his signal and pulled into the nearest parking spot. He figured a standard bouquet of 30 carnations would be perfectly fine for the chef. The shop door jingled, hitting the very Asian trinkets that made pleasant chimes when they touched. Inside, besides the florist, there was another customer. She was scrutinizing expensive orchids and large white roses. But George was looking at the woman with much greater interest, for a few moments forgetting why he had come in at all. The florist's voice jolted him out of his reverie. "Young man, can I help you?" "Ah, yes, I need a bouquet for an anniversary, 50 years for a woman." George quickly collected himself, not taking his eyes off the attractive customer. "A relative? Your mother?" the florist clarified. "No, a colleague. Nothing fancy, a formal congratulation," George replied dryly and nodded towards the purple chrysanthemums. For some reason, the florist sighed and began wrapping the flowers. A slender, petite brunette, long hair, blue eyes, too beautiful to pass by. He would regret it later, but now... George momentarily pictured a pleasant scene, and warmth spread through his chest. "These are the best roses, white angel variety," he said, stopping behind the woman. "You only give these to loved ones." The stranger turned around and glanced at George's business suit and the car keys in his hand. This trick always worked. There were so many women in the world now craving male beauty and status that the owner of both was presented with the sweetest choice. "You know about flowers?" the woman asked, adjusting her hair flirtatiously. "I know who they should be given to," George smiled dazzlingly. "Oh," the woman raised an eyebrow. "And what flowers would you give me?" George realized he was dealing with a woman with character. The thrill seized him even more strongly. He smiled again and addressed the florist, who was just finishing wrapping the chrysanthemums. Be so kind as to add 21 white roses from the ones the lady was choosing. He readily took his wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket. Under the stranger's astonished gaze, they left together with the bouquet of carnations. An unexpected companion with a bouquet of white roses. Do you give bouquets like this to all the women you meet? She asked with a smile. No, the man put away his wallet. You're the first. The woman blushed, flattered. And I hope you won't refuse to have dinner with me tonight? George asked, using his standard line. I won't refuse. She extended her hand to him. Diana. George kissed the outstretched hand, looking into her eyes. George, Savignon Restaurant, 8 in the evening. I might be a little late. I think that's acceptable on a first date. George paused for a second, feigning thought. Until tonight, Diana. Until tonight, George. He walked to his car, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. All this time, he watched the woman. The suit, the car, and the charm had worked flawlessly. George winked at himself in the rearview mirror and drove out of the parking lot. By evening, the lady would be completely softened by her own dreams and would agree to anything, although she was too beautiful to be limited to just one evening. It had been a while since he'd had a long-term affair. Who knew? Maybe it was time. He himself hesitated where to invite her, to which of his restaurants. But then he decided to choose the one that was only 2 blocks away, so as not to bother with an extra trip. Diana, as she had warned, was 20 minutes late, but she appeared in a skirt with such a slit that George felt hot. Dinner quickly made it clear that they were both adults. I want to get straight to the point. George swirled the glass of whiskey in his hands. I'm married, but I don't love her. And anyway, it was a marriage of convenience, a formality. Diana looked at him intently, sipping her dry red wine. You know, I'm not in a hurry to settle down at home and get bogged down in domesticity either. She ran her finger along the stem of the glass. We both understand what we want from each other, don't we? And your wife is no obstacle to me at all. George rarely heard such things. Usually his paramours started with regrets, reproaches, sometimes even hysterics with demands. He quickly sent such women packing. A toy is a toy precisely so it doesn't tell its master what to do, but accepts his rules. Dinner ended at a hotel. Both got what they wanted from each other. George didn't stay the night. He went home, promising to call in a few days. Left alone, she didn't regret what had happened in the least. Moreover, she realized she had stumbled upon a big fish, and that showing too much character now would be extremely disadvantageous. For the first while, she needed to be a gentle kitten, and then he would start staying the night, and he would divorce his wife. Patience, Diana, patience, she told herself, looking at the shadow from the night lamp. Handsome, smart, not poor. It's worth putting in the effort here. Nina collapsed onto the sofa in the living room, exhausted. She had been on her feet since morning today, visiting suppliers, looking for an error in the accounting, interviewing a new chef, ordering cutlery. When you own a chain of restaurants, there's almost no time for rest. New tasks appear every day. Nina understood this when she entered the catering business. However, she loved her work with all her soul. In her time, she had trained as a chef herself, then quickly finished personnel management courses, worked for almost 9 years in an elite restaurant, and knew the industry inside out. And then, after selling her grandmother's apartment, she started her own business and met her future husband, George, that same year. The woman didn't hesitate for long. She accepted the proposal, as there was no time to be picky about suitors. The years that other girls spent dating, she dedicated to building her business and working. George was handsome, and Nina was flattered that he had chosen her. Soon her husband proved that he also had a good business sense, and Nina appointed him manager of her chain of establishments. Malicious tongues whispered that George was a kept man, but the woman didn't believe it, or didn't want to believe it, or simply didn't have the time. Nina's mind was amazing at planning, distributing, evaluating, and forecasting everything related to her business. But in matters of the subtle science of love, the woman was completely illiterate. By some miracle, Nina, captivated by his charm, did not make her husband a co-owner of the chain. She glanced at the clock. It was just after 11. There was a rustle in the hallway. "You're late again today." Nina came out into the corridor to meet her husband. "Yes," George nodded curtly, taking off his jacket. "There were problems with the new uniform for the waiters. It took a long time to sort out." "Oh, that seamstress," Nina sighed. "She always lets us down." "Tell me about it." George pecked her briefly on the cheek and went into the room to change. "Did you have dinner? I brought something from the mini banquet for Eleanor Peterson's anniversary." 10 minutes later, they were sitting at the large table in the luxurious kitchen. Nina couldn't remember the last time she had cooked something substantial here herself. Usually they had a quick breakfast like coffee and waffles or scrambled eggs, ate lunch at work, and had dinner delivered. There were too many things to do to fit in a couple of hours of cooking. Although Nina loved the culinary craft and had once taught the head chef of her first restaurant how to properly braise meat and turn any tomatoes into perfect ones. An experienced observer would immediately notice how George's peacocking faded next to Nina, how he struggled to suppress everything that was so vibrant in the company of his numerous mistresses. His gaze became gray, his movements quick but constrained, his smile politely strained. At first, George tried to express himself next to his wife, but quickly realized that she couldn't give him what other women did. He chose a different tactic, rarely appearing at home, giving perfunctory gifts once a month, being polite and never arguing. "Maybe we could watch an episode of that series," Nina suggested. "Nina, I'd love to, but I'm dead on my feet. My eyes are already closing. I only got home by a miracle." George waved her off and simultaneously gave a theatrical yawn, rubbing his eyelids. The woman sighed. She knew they had both been on their feet all day, but she hoped for a miracle. After all, a woman's soul unconsciously craved romance, to snuggle up next to her beloved husband, pull a blanket over them, and fall asleep watching a favorite movie. George rinsed his plate and went to shower. When Nina reached the bedroom, he was already asleep. The woman lay down beside him and hugged her husband. The pillow quickly carried her off to sleep as well. "Mr. George, there's a guest asking for you in the dining area." Daisy, a waitress, peeked into the small office where George was doing restaurant paperwork. "Has something happened?" The man looked up from his laptop. "No, nothing. She said she's an acquaintance of yours." Daisy seemed embarrassed for some reason. Very subtly and discreetly, but George noticed. He always noticed how women trembled if he paid them attention, especially young provincial girls. George subconsciously evaluated all female employees who came for interviews and, again subconsciously, hired only those he found attractive. George liked Daisy. It was pleasant to watch her work. "I'll be down in a moment," the executive director of the restaurant replied after a pause. George adjusted his jacket and went into the dining area. At a table for two by the window, Diana was perched in a chair with the grace of a panther. She smiled radiantly at him and half rose in greeting. The man was pleasantly surprised and sat down opposite her. "How are you?" Diana sipped her coffee with an innocent smile. "What are you doing here?" "I missed you," the woman replied, batting her eyelashes even more innocently. "It was easy to figure out which restaurant you manage from the photos on your account. So, here I am." George admired her with restraint, and then examined his mistress with no restraint at all. Diana certainly knew how to present herself at her best. Today she came in tight trousers, heels, and a bright, fitted white blouse that emphasized her long, dark hair. "Daisy, bring the guest a tiramisu on the house," George instructed, passing by the waitress. "Mr. George, you're so generous," Daisy purred, both subtly and ingratiatingly. George unconsciously swelled with pride. Anyone who says only women like receiving compliments is lying. It works for both sexes. "I thought I should invite you somewhere myself today," the woman continued, spooning the foam from her coffee. "Go on," George placed his palm on the table. "Tonight, there's a performance of Woe from Wit at the theater. I think a cultural evening won't hurt after yesterday's fire." Diana smiled with the corner of her lips and raised an eyebrow expressively. "Only, I'm afraid I don't have a suitable outfit for going to such a place. You. He had been thinking of calling his mistress in the evening himself, and here was such initiative, as if she had read his mind. And George loved beautiful, initiative-taking women. This softened the fact that he was being asked for a gift. The man smiled back at Diana mysteriously, took out his smartphone, made a couple of movements, and a banking notification sound for tickets rang out. I've taken care of the tickets. He put the device back in his inner pocket. And you take care of the outfit. Diana leaned across the table and pecked George on the cheek. And now I must excuse myself, work awaits, George rose from his chair. Until tonight, and have a pleasant break, as we say. He winked at Diana goodbye and left. She waited until her lover had disappeared and quickly glanced at her smartphone screen, nodding to herself in satisfaction. Diana began to slowly eat the dessert that had been brought. At the same time, she held her phone to her ear. Were you doubting me? These trousers work wonders. Yeah, we're going to the theater tonight, of course, Stacy whispered. Irrelevant. Listening to guests' conversations was part of Daisy's routine workdays. A month passed. If at first George allowed himself to see his mistress only during breaks and on free days, soon she consumed all his space and settled deep inside, where the man usually didn't let women for entertainment. Diana changed, adapting to his mood, but in any form, she was invariably beautiful. She said what he wanted to hear, admired him, and this fueled his interest even more. Next to her, he was bright, charismatic, generous, gallant. Next to Nina, he was uniform, calm, monotonous, blandly simple, with a businesslike expression on his face. They went to museums, exhibitions, various events together, even went to a country retreat once, and went shopping. Looks like someone's fallen in love. Stacy lounged on the sofa in Diana's tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. And that someone isn't me, her friend chuckled. Is it great with him? It would be great with anyone if they have money and looks. You, as usual, don't talk much about yourself. Don't invite me over. Stacy took a candy from a vase on the shelf. I tell him what's necessary for now. Wedding organizer. I love Mediterranean cuisine, European culture, and quality clothes. He doesn't need to know about my rented apartment and my past romances. Diana swung her leg, sitting on a chair nearby. The goal is to take him from his wife, and then we can talk about other things. See, Diana, you know how to reel in men. Stacy stretched. My ideal type is in the flower shop over there. Believe me, maybe yours is waiting for you in line at the deli counter. Stacy laughed. The woman remained silent. Well, come on, as usual, Stacy shrugged, chewing another candy. Let him take you on vacation or buy you an expensive ring. Vacation is a bit too soon, Diana shook her head. A little later when he's ready. Divorce him, darling. If you drag your feet like this, he'll never be ready. Stacy stood up from the sofa and put her hands on her hips. You need to state your position. At least those shoes, remember? That works, Diana looked at her friend slyly. Get ready, let's go try on some shoes. That's the spirit. Stacy gave her a thumbs up and started looking for her handbag. Nina was reviewing documents, sitting in the car next to her husband. They had been running errands around the city together since morning. Traffic jams, calls, urgency. Nina could handle all this calmly. Experience had taught her. But George didn't like such fuss and was nervous, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. And he also complained about the increase in purchase prices last month. Meat has soared, especially beef. What have they come up with, raising prices in the middle of summer? Cows have plenty of food growing, George grumbled. Vaccinations, grain, fuel, electricity, Nina listed calmly, without even looking up from her papers. If one thing grows, another grows. For now, we're managing, and we'll keep the prices of dishes the same. Guests are used to our conditions. We'll raise them if there's another 20 or 30% markup on meat. But we'll earn less, George objected. We'll observe for now, the woman replied. George didn't give up. Seafood prices have also jumped. Everything is getting more expensive. Maybe it's better not to buy a new freezer than to keep the prices the same. We need the freezer, George, Nina objected. The old one broke twice, and the chef's prep spoiled, costing a tidy sum. George was thinking where else he could find a flaw and what to use to cover his expenses. In reality, meat and seafood were indeed getting more expensive, but not as much as he described. George understood that the beautiful mistress was costing him more and more, but he couldn't help himself. He wanted to be with her, to spoil her. George's phone chimed, notifying him of a message in a messenger app. For some reason, Nina glanced at the device. A notification hung on the screen. Photo. George picked up the smartphone and quickly looked at the received message as quickly as he could, and with as calm a face as he could manage. But Nina still noticed how his eyebrow twitched and how a shot of women's high-heeled shoes flashed in the reflection on the screen. Inside her, an unfamiliar but very understandable feeling scraped nastily. With an effort of will, Nina suppressed it, but a cold snake of suspicion had already slithered further down her back, sending freezing needles through her. "Something important?" the woman asked her husband, as if casually. "Someone's sending jokes in the work chat," George replied, watching the traffic light at the turn carefully. Nina nodded somewhat distractedly. Passed. They arrived at the restaurant to sort out work issues. Nina was bombarded with questions by the chefs. George immediately escaped to the terrace to call someone. "You're sending me photos at a bit of a bad time." He tried to make his voice sound confident, as if playfully scolding her. "I thought your wife doesn't poke her nose into your phone," Diana remarked softly on the phone. Stung by her softness, George quickly composed himself. "No, my space belongs to me, but there are times when awkward situations happen." He leaned against the railing. "Do you want to buy these shoes? They go so well with my new handbag," Diana drawled. "It would be a huge missed opportunity not to get them. Besides, I'll look even brighter next to you in them." George swallowed, already imagining the shoes on his mistress's slender legs. Beauty, feminine magic was doing its work. "All right, I'll expect you in them tomorrow." Without hanging up, George went into his online bank and sent the required amount to Diana's card. "Is that enough?" "Yes, of course, thank you, kitten," the woman purred into the phone. Pleasure cost money, and whose money paid for these whims was a secondary matter. Nina also came out onto the terrace, exhausted by the staff's questions. Her head was buzzing with information, but outwardly, the businesswoman remained calm. "George, I think we've been working so much lately," she approached her husband. "Let's go out somewhere." "Nina, I'd love to, but I've already promised to go out of town with the guys. Colin bought a new car. He wants to celebrate." George shrugged nonchalantly. "I know you don't like his company, so I didn't even invite you." Nina sighed. The excuse was perfect. She really didn't like Colin, her husband's friend. "Well, if you're busy," she smiled tensely, "I hope you all have a good time." George smiled broadly, put his arm around her waist, and they went back inside the restaurant together. Dinners and breakfasts with her mother were a pleasant tradition for Nina. They had started long ago, and over the years had grown from scrambled eggs and cocoa in the home kitchen to full-fledged outings to the most beautiful and interesting establishments. In essence, it was her mother who instilled in Nina a love for the catering industry and played a significant role in who her daughter became. This time, Nina chose an Italian bistro with small, cozy tables and checkered tablecloths for dinner. They often changed locations, but Nina never invited her mother to her own restaurants, considering it something of a bad omen. By the appointed time, her mother still hadn't arrived. Nina looked for the Mini Cooper but couldn't find it. Her mother, despite her age of 64, was a lively, energetic, and peculiar lady who had retained a youthful mischievousness. 10 minutes later, the waiter placed a teapot and cups before Nina and served the cutlery. Her phone rang. "Nina, I'm so sorry. I won't be able to make it." Her mother's voice was filled with apologetic notes. "The neighbor's dog got sick. She took her to the vet urgently, and she asked me to sit with her granddaughter. You wouldn't leave a small child unsupervised, would you? Sorry again, dear." "Well, if that's the case, there's nothing we can do," Nina sighed. "Call George, let him stand in for me," her mother suggested from the other end. "I'll call," the woman agreed curtly. I wish Buttons Tamara Johnson good health. Bye, Mom. Nina hung up. She wasn't exactly upset, but something close to it. It's like when you go to the store for one thing and end up buying something completely different or nothing at all. Initially, the evening was supposed to be spent with her husband, then her mother, and in the end, she was sitting alone at a table, waiting. The waiter placed a pizza on the table and wished the guest a pleasant meal. It was too late to leave or refuse. Nina decided to enjoy her own company, looking out the window. Who would have thought that being a successful businesswoman and a married woman, one could feel so lonely? Good evening. Excuse me for bothering you, but you look very much like my childhood friend, a voice suddenly said nearby. Nina turned around and saw a vaguely familiar man speaking to her. And you look very much like my childhood friend, Nina laughed, recognizing the guest. He raised his eyebrows, but then smiled too. Nina, I haven't mistaken you, have I? May I sit down? Of course, Ivan. Wow, the man commented. How long has it been? 20 years? More, since they transferred you to serve in the Far East, Nina clarified. And now I'm a retired police officer. Ivan clasped his hands on the table, and I decided to move closer to my historical homeland. How are you? So many years have passed. Amazing. And so began the conversations and questions, discussions and laughter. Nina grew up with Ivan in the same courtyard. He was 2 years older than her. All their childhood they climbed into other people's yards together, built tree houses, baked potatoes in the ashes, and dreamed of growing up quickly. At school, Nina studied diligently, while Ivan got into scrapes, grew up, and went into the army by the time she graduated. Their bond was strong, and Nina was not to be offended, whether in the 1st grade or the 10th, otherwise Ivan would quickly send the offenders' noses flying. I studied there in Vladivostok, went to work in the police, became an investigator. I saw so much during that time. Now I've come here and I'm thinking about what a brave pensioner like me should do. Ivan finished his story cheerfully. It was written on your forehead that you'd wear a uniform. I'm not even surprised. Nina's mood improved noticeably. Meeting an old friend was that pleasant event, that spark of joy that she so desperately needed. And in that case, you should either bake pies or make others bake them, Ivan replied in the same tone. Confess, are you in charge of someone? Just 3 head chefs, 2 dozen waiters, and a modest restaurant. Nina stirred her tea with a spoon. No way, Ivan was genuinely amazed. So we both became who we wanted to be. It seems so, Nina agreed. What's wrong? Ivan noticed her distant gaze. Are you upset about something? Nina hesitated. She didn't want to complain about her empty suspicions, but the feeling of the icy snake hadn't left her since that moment in the car. In the end, the woman, choosing her words carefully, described the subject of her concern to her friend. Ivan furrowed his brow. An idea lit up his face. How about I keep an eye on your husband, he suggested casually. I'm retired anyway, plenty of time. I'll get to know the city properly at the same time. That feels wrong somehow. Nina looked at the man doubtfully. What if he realizes he's being followed? Ivan smiled broadly. Have you forgotten who I am? Surveillance and data collection were my professional duties for many years, and I must say, I performed them flawlessly. Ivan, you're growling, Nina said in a dry voice, and then burst into loud laughter, inadvertently cheering Ivan up. It'll all be taken care of, comrade investigator. Can I just finish dinner? She took the last piece of pizza from the plate. They talked for a long time, ordered a second pot of tea and then dessert. The planned dinner turned out to be anything but. By the end of summer, Diana had grown accustomed to a comfortable and well-provided life with George. Like many girls from the provinces, she came to the capital to study, but along the way, she realized she had chosen the wrong profession. So, Diana was a banker by diploma, but in reality, she was involved in designing premises for various celebrations, mostly weddings. This activity brought the woman not only good dividends, but also useful connections. Diana quickly began to view relationships as a way to climb the social ladder and get rich. She disdainfully threw fairy tales about love and paradise in a shack into her mental trash can. Who needed that kind of love when money had long decided everything in the city? And she saw confirmation of this at the weddings she designed, where women married wealthy, established, and educated men. Exceptions, of course, occurred, but they were rare. Diana believed that love would invariably appear if your husband had a good income and respect, and his appearance played almost a secondary role here. But no matter how much her brain argued, the pull towards beauty crept up from within. Why did Diana latch onto George? She'd hit the jackpot she had always secretly hoped for. She wasn't bothered by his wife or any other aggravating circumstances. "Take everything you can," the woman would say. Like-minded people for this position were found very quickly. At one of the weddings, Diana met Stacy, one of the bridesmaids. The sharp-tongued, cheerful gossip appealed to Diana, and soon they started spending time together. Stacy also came from the provinces, and dreamed of settling down well at someone else's expense. True, for now, her settling down was limited to working in a mid-range boutique and living with her aunt. Over time, the woman tidied herself up. But while Diana managed to quickly root out her provincial nature, Stacy didn't succeed, and it occasionally showed through in her manners and conversation. This was precisely why only men who picked up on this were attracted to her. Provincial thugs or conquerors of the capital living in dormitories. Stacy got angry. Diana laughed. She herself was luckier. As in any fishing, big fish take the bait less often than those who want to be like them. At 25, Diana already had experience with a government official, the owner of a bathhouse complex, a successful photographer, and a titled athlete. Only none of the relationships ended with the coveted trap on her finger. The official was also married. The businessman, for some reason, said he would marry the girl his parents approved of. But Diana didn't get upset. During the relationships, she managed to shake out everything useful for the future. "It's time to hint to your George about a joint vacation," Stacy yawned. "It's the velvet season now, the perfect time for trips to the sea." "Agreed," Diana nodded. "I was thinking about it myself." "What is there to think about? You're already covered in gifts." Stacy gestured dramatically towards her. "He gave you earrings, bought you shoes, ordered a dress. You've been to all the decent places already. What are you waiting for? Throw Nina overboard." They were sitting on an elegant bench in the shade of sprawling trees on the embankment. It was stuffy. Diana fanned herself with a promotional booklet she had hastily grabbed from a promoter. Stacy wanted to give her more and better advice. Lately, she had been avidly hanging on Diana's every word about her relationship with George, egging her on. "I'd demand the Maldives right away." "Do you think I should?" Diana suppressed a hint of doubt in her question. "Of course, friend. You've been seeing each other for 2 months already. With his means, he should have figured it out himself by now. He drives a Lexus, but the thought of taking his lady on vacation still hasn't crossed his mind." Stacy tapped her forehead with a bent finger. "Why don't you enlighten him?" "Maybe you're right," Diana drawled. "I'm tired of being here. I want a change of scenery, to warm my bones, get a tan without a solarium, and my designer swimsuit is just lying around unused." "A friend wouldn't give bad advice," Diana immediately agreed. She suggested to George that they go on vacation together, 7 to 10 days. She needed to come up with an excuse to present to his wife without causing pain, and she also needed to figure out where to squeeze out the extra money for this vacation. It was one thing to be away from home in the evening or give his mistress earrings, and another to sneak away for a week's vacation costing a couple of $100,000. Inside George, 2 voices were fighting. One, adventurous, urged him to forget everything and give Diana the trip, and the second, meticulous, calculated the risks. "If you were divorced, you'd be taking girls around the world, not sitting under anyone's thumb," the first thought raged. "Yeah, divorced and left to chew on nothing. It was high time you told her to at least put something in your name," the second one sneered. Ideally, George wanted to catch 2 birds with 1 stone, live comfortably without much effort, and date a beautiful mistress while having a wife. But as the years passed, The role of the second woman began to weigh on George. Although few people knew about it, their formal, dry relationship with his wife would only go unnoticed by a blind person. "You can't get a divorce, George," he muttered, "but nobody else needs to know that. Right, right. But the vacation adventure will have to be canceled and smoothed over somehow." The man also remembered that in September, the restaurant he was in charge of had a lot of business and banquets planned. Flying away at such a moment was extremely risky. Nina might suspect something, but George also didn't want to quarrel with Diana. "We'll find a compromise." George looked at his reflection in the glass door and smirked. Beneficial for the one who initiated it, of course. Nina strolled slowly through the restaurant dining area, observing the fruit of her labor. The woman watched it with tenderness and care, like a growing child bringing home certificates, A's, and medals from school. Nina was distracted from her pleasant contemplation by a phone call. "Hello, Nina. I have a full report on the work done." Ivan's voice was as casual as ever, but at the same time, he seemed to be trying to hide something. "Hello, Ivan." Nina's heart pounded loudly under her shirt. "Do you want to discuss it now?" "I think so," Ivan sighed somewhat tensely. "The information is curious, if that's the word. I've parked nearby, on the corner of the street." "Okay, I'll be right there." Nina hung up. An unpleasant tightness squeezed her chest, and a cold sweat broke out on her back. Why had she agreed to this adventure at all, knowing what might surface? Perhaps she didn't want to believe it, or was afraid. It was ridiculous in her position. Nina collected herself, clenched her hands into fists, exhaled, and pushed open the door to the street. She found Ivan in his car. He was thoughtfully examining something on his smartphone screen. When Nina got into the passenger seat, the man placed the device on his knee screen down. "I won't keep you in suspense," Ivan began without ceremony. "I didn't observe George constantly, only for a month, but what I managed to see and record was enough." Nina swallowed. Ivan picked up his smartphone and handed it to her, after turning on the screen. The photo that opened showed George sitting in a cafe with a young brunette, not in a friendly way at all, whispering something in her ear. "At the Bohemia Cafe," Ivan prompted. Nina raised her hand, ran an icy finger over the screen. In the next shot, George was kissing the same woman in his car. The photo was taken through the windshield, but the professional hand of the former police officer had captured the shot, so that there was no doubt about who was in it. There were several more photos after that, but they all spoke eloquently of the same thing. "So, a mistress," Nina stated in a harsh, unfamiliar voice. "Here it is, the truth I refuse to believe." "I'm sorry, Nina." Ivan perked up, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I tried to remain impartial in moments like these, but I can't. You're not just another person filing a report." "Did you find out who she is?" "Of course." Ivan opened a folder with other photos on his smartphone and began scrolling through them for Nina. Diana Strelitskaya, 25 years old, from out of town, works as a wedding decorator, and also a professional capital city charmer of wealthy men. Nina carefully examined the photos of her rival: slender, long-haired, blue-eyed, stylish clothes, her complete opposite, and very young too. "And how long has this been going on?" Nina asked, gathering her strength again. "Based on my observations, a little over 2 months," Ivan drawled. "The motive here is more than clear. She needs a rich man. He needs—" Ivan hesitated, carefully searching for words. "You don't have to be delicate," Nina finished the sentence. "He needs someone younger and prettier. Deep down, I've known for a long time that a handsome man like George couldn't be with me out of great love. I'm not stupid either, and I understand what attracted him initially. But I didn't stop loving him because of that. I should have." The woman's lips trembled, her eyes stung, and the pain was felt through all the walls. Nina wiped away the tears with the back of her hand, sniffled. Ivan involuntarily began to comfort her. "Nina, your husband is a poser and almost a kept man. Don't you dare blame yourself for anything. Besides, that's not all I found out." "What?" Nina stared at him in astonishment. "What do you mean, not all?" "Just like that." Ivan somehow conspiratorially furrowed his brows. It seems both lovers are playing their own game and think no one suspects anything. In essence, that's true. Only I burst out laughing when I figured out what was what. Nina looked at him in bewilderment. Instead of explaining, Ivan showed her something else on his smartphone. Nina carefully examined the picture. I don't understand anything. Does he have two of them? She furrowed her brow. That's what I couldn't figure out at first either, Ivan nodded. It seems your husband wants to have everything everywhere at once. Ivan leaned towards her and began explaining something, counting on his fingers and drawing diagrams. And Nina laughed. Absurdly, foolishly, and completely inappropriately. But she laughed. What should I do in this situation? She asked the former investigator after all the discussions. Act as usual, calmly, Ivan said. Let everything take its course, and I'll continue gathering information so you can do everything beautifully in the end. I hope, by the way, you're not thinking of forgiving him. Out of the question, Nina shook her head categorically. I've finally faced my fear, and now I don't intend to depend on it. This is my life. I'll send you all the photos, but don't start a showdown prematurely. He's a jerk, I understand, but we need to see this through. You won't lose anything legally in the divorce, right? And he'll get almost nothing. So let's at least nail him for the sake of poetic justice. He hugged Nina affectionately and gently shook her. She composed herself, smiled, thanked her friend for his work, and got out of the car. Why aren't we flying? Diana pouted, wrinkling her nose. George sat opposite her in a soft armchair on the terrace of a trendy bistro. Boats and ships sailed by on the river nearby. The wind blew cool air from the water's surface. Understand? I simply can't drop everything and fly away in September. George showed her the restaurant hall booking list for the month ahead. I can't now, but I promise we'll revisit this issue in the future. I was already set on the sea and sun, Diana continued to pout on principle, although she perfectly understood the real reason for her lover's refusal to travel. His wife, and only his wife, prevented them from enjoying their vacation and each other. He could talk about being busy, about plans, but for the first time, her lover's wife was truly annoying Diana. Gifts and time were no longer enough. She wanted to be the sole owner. Stacy constantly egged her on. Otherwise, darling, you can only dream of a comfortable and settled life, her friend would say. You need to free up your comfortable seat quickly. I brought you something to brighten up this situation. George reached into his pocket. He placed a beautiful box on the table and nodded invitingly, suggesting she open it. Diana took the gift with interest and found a ring with a large transparent stone in the box. Oh, is this an engagement ring? She examined the jewelry, which sparkled in the sunlight. Let's say so. George contemplated the woman's joy and delight at the gift. He liked that feeling. He fed off it. So you're proposing to me? She put the ring on the ring finger of her right hand. Let's assume that, George smiled mysteriously, folding his hands over his stomach. But you're still married, Diana looked at him slyly. I know, and I promise I'll resolve that issue, George replied evasively, and at the same time confidently. It seemed Diana was quite satisfied with this answer, as she kept admiring the stone in the ring and had already sent several photos to her friend in their chat. Well, of course, it would have been foolish not to show off such a gift. George understood that he couldn't postpone the moment forever. A divorce from Nina would be disadvantageous to him in every sense, so sooner or later, the affair with Diana had to end, unless she ultimately swallowed the fact of his marriage. Diana pressed gently but often, and George understood why. Many of their plans were ruined because of Nina. Anyone would start to get annoyed. That same evening, Diana was walking home from the gym, her sports bag slung over her shoulder. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Stacy was relentlessly praising the ring and marveling at George's impeccable taste. Did he tell you clearly that he'll divorce her? She asked. Almost, Diana confirmed. Almost, friend, doesn't count, Stacy remarked. Either it's a clear answer, or he's still leading you on. No dates, no action plan. What is this? Are you suggesting you brainwash him with this question every time you meet? Stacy bent down to tie her shoelaces. I suggest you go to his gray little wife yourself and put a definitive end to their family history, Stacy stated firmly. Otherwise, it'll be like with that politician. Let your George get angry, but you need to nip it in the bud. So, nip it? Diana snorted doubtfully. She had never done that before, but she had played out similar scenarios in her mind many times. Yes, of course, nip it, Stacy confirmed heatedly. There's no other way. Can we go together? No, he's my man. And who am I supposed to be afraid of there, Stacy? Diana recalled George's plain legal wife. An old gray mouse? Please. A couple of phrases will be enough to make her cry. I still don't understand what's keeping them together at all. Beautiful people should be with equally beautiful people. It's high time, friend, Stacy supported her. Go and demand what's yours from someone who clearly got him by mistake. Having finished these grand speeches with mutual laughter, the women said goodbye at Diana's doorstep. She quickly slipped into the shower, feeling combative, and at the same time figuring out what she should wear to appear before her lover's wife to further emphasize the difference between them. The doorbell rang after lunch, catching Nina off guard. That day, she had decided to work from home and had been sitting at her laptop in the kitchen since morning. George had left to prepare for a large banquet and wasn't expected back yet. Her mother hadn't warned her about a visit, and she wasn't expecting a courier either. Nina put down her laptop and straightened up. Her back only ached when she wore the comfortable trousers and t-shirt from her home set. The woman took a sip of her now cold tea as she walked and headed for the door. Through the peephole, standing at the door and persistently pressing the doorbell button, was her husband's mistress. Nina even blinked, not believing her eyes. Her mouth went dry. The woman looked carefully through the peephole again. Yes, it was true. The woman standing on the landing was the very girl from the photos Ivan had given her. Nina took a deep breath, then exhaled, and reached for the handle. A wild, childish thought flashed through her mind. Maybe pretend no one's home? But the woman quickly chased it away. The latch rattled with a metallic sound. The door opened. Their gazes met. In those couple of seconds, an experienced observer would have read contempt, disdain, and disgust in the eyes of one, and vague interest, bewilderment, and strange restraint in the eyes of the other. Hello, Nina. I won't beat around the bush and will say it straight away. Diana looked Nina up and down with a look of complete contempt. Your husband and I love each other, that's a fact. And he doesn't love you. That's also a fact. So let him go nicely and give him a divorce. Nina overcame the initial wave of uncertainty and leaned her shoulder against the doorframe. She examined her rival. Diana was in full makeup and dressed to the nines, clearly wanting to contrast, emphasizing her youth and vibrancy, as if Nina hadn't attended management courses. In her mind, the image of the mistress changed to that of a pompous green chorus girl who had come for a job interview. The substitution worked. Hello, Diana. I agree with the second fact, as I've recently become aware of it, but I would strongly disagree with the first. My husband is capable of loving only himself, Nina said calmly, looking Diana directly in the eyes. A flicker of surprise crossed Diana's eyes. The gray mouse wife wasn't the one who was supposed to immediately back down before her, and she knew her name from somewhere too. You're still not a match for him, and we both know it. Diana put her mask of confidence back on. He's young, handsome, successful. He should be with a woman like him, who will make him happy. Give him a divorce. The moment for the snap in the nose Ivan had talked about had arrived. And who said I wouldn't give it? She said, watching her rival carefully, which clearly threw her off balance. Take George right now if you want. I'm even willing to let you into the apartment to pack his suitcases. Nina stepped back and beckoned invitingly into the hallway. Diana hesitated. Something clicked in her head. Just bear in mind that you won't get anything. The restaurant business is mine. This apartment was bought by me before the marriage. And even the car, which dear George used to impress you, also belongs to me. No, if the love is so great, I won't stand in your way. As they say, with your loved one, paradise is even in a shack. Nina shrugged. All right, I'll let him keep working as a waiter. Diana was stunned. The carefully planned scheme in her head collapsed like a house of cards. She backed away. Oh, and I almost forgot. Nina took out her smartphone and showed Diana a photo. The picture showed a familiar car and all too familiar people. George was kissing Stacy near her house. Diana froze, staring at Nina with wild eyes, and began frantically pressing the elevator button. It was like a grasshopper trapped in a glass jar in the midday sun. All her confidence, mannerisms, and feline grace vanished in an instant as Diana realized the idiotic position she was in. Finally, the elevator doors opened, and the woman disappeared inside. Nina watched her go with triumph. Now she didn't have to pretend anymore. She could cast aside the beautiful and ungrateful toy. Let someone else have such happiness. As for her, Nina, she didn't need it for free. It wasn't until she was in the taxi that Diana fully realized how cleverly she had been tricked. One had deliberately blinded her with borrowed wealth. The other had talked her ear off and pushed her in the direction she wanted her to go. Inside, she was seething. Even the taxi seemed too slow. She arrived at Stacy's building. She didn't know why she had come here, what she wanted to see or find out. Diana looked around. The painfully familiar car. The woman deliberately didn't ring the intercom and slipped into the entrance with one of the neighbors. She went up to the third floor and again, like an hour ago, started pressing the doorbell button. A couple of minutes later, the door opened. A disheveled Stacy stood on the threshold in a housecoat. "Where is he?" Diana pushed her aside and entered the apartment without ceremony, still wearing her shoes. "Are you drunk? Who?" Stacy twirled a finger at her temple. Instead of answering, Diana stared at her wildly and began to have a tantrum. "Did you decide to make a fool of me?" Diana reached the old-fashioned tall wardrobe in the room and threw open the doors. That quiet, tingling pause occurred. In the depths of the room, among the hangers of clothes, holding shoes and trousers, stood George, looking at the two former friends with the expression of a deer in the headlights. "Oh, you traitor!" Diana grabbed his ear and dragged him into the room. George yelped, stumbled back awkwardly, then stood up, shielding his face from the blows his disgraced mistress rained down on him. The situation was worthy of a joke. A bad joke. Diana glared fiercely first at her former suitor and then at her former friend. "How? Why did you do this to me?" "And why do you always get everything?" Stacy flared up suddenly and brightly. "All the perks, all the handsome men, all the best options, and I'm just like a little dog picking up scraps in the form of stories about your gifts and romances. Learn to share, friend." Diana was speechless. The one she had entrusted with all her secrets, all her ideas and mysteries, turned out to be a treacherous rat. "And now I understand everything." Diana, her cheeks burning, slowly clapped her hands. "You deliberately persuaded me to raise my demands, hoping George would think twice and dump such an expensive woman. And I, like an idiot, believed you out of a sense of my own importance. And you sent me to his wife so I would make a fool of myself, and then you would come in and take over." "Sarcastic," Stacy remarked. "Maybe I'm not as beautiful, but I can not only wear expensive shoes and beg for another ring, but also be a real person, listen to problems, give advice. And you're like a plastic doll, soulless and all dolled up." Diana almost physically felt as if she had been spat on. Without fully understanding what she was doing, she rushed at Stacy and delivered a resounding slap. The echo resounded even in the corners of the room. Stacy's head buzzed like an empty pot. Amidst the noise of the quarrel, the rivals didn't even notice how the hero and instigator of the whole mess quietly slipped out of the apartment through the unlocked door. Without a word, they rushed to the window and only managed to see the rear bumper of the familiar Lexus. At home, George quickly tidied himself up and took a change of suit from the hanger in his study so that nothing would remind him of the shameful situation George had found himself in today. The adventurousness and danger that were invariably present in the situation he had created excited George. Stacy wrote to George on social media and suggested meeting. Diana had shown her his profile so often that remembering and finding the man later was easy. Stacy didn't ask him to take her to expensive restaurants, didn't ask for gifts. but she really knew how to listen. The more Diana asked for, the more George liked Stacy. And at some point, he decided, why choose one when you can be with everyone at once? One for money, the second for cozy evenings, the third for going out and maintaining his status. Why not live like that? George drove home hoping to rest from the situation he had gotten into. But the day wasn't over yet. "Nina, I finished early," the man said loudly, slamming the front door. "Are you home?" "Home, George, home," the woman replied. "I'm so tired." He entered the room, rubbing his forehead deliberately, tired of the agonizing choice of which of the two mistresses to prefer. Nina looked at her husband sitting in the armchair. It was as if George had been doused with ice water. He tried to say something, but only incoherent sounds came out. "I know what you're tired of." Nina stood up and threw a pile of photos at his feet, showing him alternately with Diana and Stacy. George stared blankly at the pictures scattered across the parquet floor. "Did you think you were the smartest?" Nina walked right up to her husband. "And the saying about the well is apparently unknown to you." George just looked at her in silence, gradually realizing how badly he had messed up. "Out of the apartment by tomorrow, please." Nina turned away to the window. "And by the way, I've already found a new manager. If the position of waiter suits you, you can stay. Otherwise, get out and go wherever you please. I don't need a traitor husband, a cheater, and a kept man." "Nina, let's talk," George began, but his wife interrupted him. "Get out now. Just leave the car keys here. Otherwise, I'll report it stolen." George realized he had played too much and outplayed himself. The treasure chest of abundance turned out to be a trap he shouldn't have trifled with. Empty, humiliated by his own bad inclinations, George trudged off to pack his things. Excuses were pointless. He thought about staying with one of his mistresses, but realized Diana wouldn't forgive him, and Stacy didn't really need him. Rather, she just wanted to show her friend up that way. George felt used and worthless. Nina heard him leave the living room. She felt she had won. But most importantly, she admitted to herself what she had feared and diligently ignored. It was as if a dirty curtain had been pulled back in her consciousness, and pure, bright light poured in. The first snow fell on the city like a thin veil, covering sidewalks, roofs, trees, settling on fluffy coats and red noses, hiding in bushes or landing on the tongues of curious children. Nina hurried to meet it. She hadn't seen Ivan since September. He had hurried off to his older sister near Murom then, while she was recovering from a broken leg. And now, this morning, her old friend had written to her and suggested meeting. Nina was brushing up on her driving skills. Although she knew how to drive, she preferred taking taxis or relying on her ex-husband's driving. But now the woman was firmly resolved to steer her own life. Ivan chose an unremarkable cafe for their meeting. A plump woman in an old bonnet was frying juicy chebureks behind the cashier in the open kitchen. "This place reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen." Nina looked around inside with interest when she and Ivan met and started talking. "That's why I chose it," the former investigator smiled, following her gaze. "Like in childhood, everything feels atmospheric. I want something simple, understandable, warm, comforting, and hot. A cheburek?" "Let's do it," Nina nodded in agreement. 10 minutes later, they were both devouring hot chebureks. They steamed, they dripped juice, but no one minded. Nina got her hands all messy and couldn't remember the last time she felt so light and good with someone. Even the director of a restaurant chain has the right to indulge in a simple tea and good old chebureks. "My sister near Murom has such forests, a fairy tale, perfect for cross-country skiing on a winter morning." Ivan wiped his hands with a napkin. "I remember you loved to run like that as a child." "There was more snow and colder frosts when I was a child," Nina remarked. "But you're right. I'd love to escape here for a day and go to the forest." "So you're already agreeing to go?" Ivan asked soulfully. "I think the restaurants can work without my supervision for a couple of days," Nina stretched. "And I need to drive not only in the city but also on the highway. Skills are only developed through practice." "We can go today. Why waste time, right?" Ivan winked at her. "Ivan," Nina chewed her lips, formulating her thought correctly. Will this be a friendly trip based on warm memories, or a romantic journey with hopes for something more? Ivan smiled with the corners of his lips, and wrinkles gathered at the corners of his eyes. That's entirely up to you, the man replied. Let it be the second, she said after a pause. Ivan's hand covered her fingers on the table, tenderly, confidently, and with that, Nina thought that another chapter in her life was beginning, but in a new book.